Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to completely flip the script on a historical assumption you have probably heard your entire life. We're diving into a real paradigm shifter today, contrasting the ancient world with the modern one to figure out what legal complexity actually means.
So, what is the heaviest legal burden in history? Seriously, think about it for a second. What does true, crushing legal complexity actually look like? When you picture a society weighed down by an impossible mountain of rules, what era or civilization comes to mind? Most of us jump straight back thousands of years to ancient times, right? Well, let's challenge that by setting up our modern baseline first.
Let me just throw some reality at you to set the stage. What we are looking at is just a microscopic fraction of the staggering bureaucratic labyrinth of the North Carolina General Assembly. We've got Chapter 1 for civil procedure, Chapter 14 for criminal law, Chapter 20 just for motor vehicles, and it keeps going. Chapter 105 for taxation, all the way down to Chapter 169 for the regulatory sandbox. And get this, that is literally just the table of contents. It doesn't even touch the endless subchapters. 169. That is the reality of the modern citizen. North Carolina alone has 169 massive chapters of statutes, and each one of those contains dozens or even hundreds of specific sections, regulations, and endless repeals. The wild part? As a modern citizen living in that state, you are technically bound by this totally incomprehensible web of paperwork every single day.
All right, let's pivot. Section 1, the ancient world and the myth of 613.
613. When people think about ancient biblical law, the Torah, they immediately think of this famous number. It's the traditional count of all the specific commandments given in the books of Moses. And yeah, 613 ancient rules sounds absolutely terrifying for a single person to memorize, let alone pull off perfectly every day. But, this is exactly where the historical misunderstanding begins.
Let's really dive into this. When the law was handed down at Mount Sinai, the concept of a singular, distinct Jewish people didn't even fully exist yet. The law was actually given to a newly liberated massive crowd known as the Heir of Rav, or the mixed multitude. We are talking escaping slaves, native Egyptians, prisoners of war, and foreign laborers. The rules had to be immediately adopted by this incredibly diverse crowd of outsiders, not a bunch of isolated religious scholars. And this verse, Exodus 12:49, brilliantly hits the nail on the head. One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you. Because this biblical law applied equally to both the native and the foreigner, the daily personal expectations literally had to be streamlined. I mean, think about it. An outsider joining the camp needed to learn the core community rules in a single afternoon. You can't just hand a liberated laborer 613 complex legal statutes and expect a functioning society.
Which brings us to Section 2, the funnel of elimination, and distributing the burden.
So, if a single person didn't have to follow all 613 laws, who did? Well, it's a lot like a giant puzzle. Biblical law was essentially a societal constitution, and the burden was distributed. Roughly 300 of those laws deal exclusively with the priesthood, the tabernacle, and ritual animal sacrifices, stuff an ordinary layman was legally forbidden from doing anyway. Then you have another 163 or so laws written strictly for institutional leaders, like kings, judges managing courts, or specific landowners farming in the Promised Land.
So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that when you strip away the heavy institutional codes meant to run a whole state, the burden on the common man shrinks drastically. An ordinary city-dwelling person was really only looking at a layman's portion of about 100 to 150 daily personal laws. That is a massive drop from the 613 we started with.
Let's keep going. Section 3, the missing temple and the ultimate historical filter.
For a modern reader, that legal burden actually drops even further, and it's due to a massive historical shift, the destruction of the physical temple in Jerusalem. See, biblical law strictly dictates that the central components of the religion can only happen at a specific location chosen by God. When you have an active temple, sure, you have sacrifices, tithes, and complex ritual purity, but without that physical sanctuary, those vast legal infrastructures literally vanish into permanent suspension. When you map this out, it beautifully shows how the removal of the temple systematically shuts down the heaviest elements of the ancient code. Take animal sacrifices. Originally, a layman bought an animal and handed it to a priest. Today, entirely forbidden outside a temple. Ritual purity laws regulated physical entry into the tabernacle camp. No camp, the mechanics are suspended. Even agricultural tithing was basically a civic tax to feed landless priests. Without a working sanctuary, you literally cannot biblically tithe agricultural yields.
Okay, Section 4, the Layman's Code and what actually remains.
So it begs a really fascinating question. If we strip away the 300 priestly laws, the judges, the kings, ancient agriculture, and literally everything dependent on a missing temple, what is a layman actually responsible for today? Well, what remains is this beautiful, highly concentrated ethical core based entirely on clean living and community justice. Do not murder, commit adultery, steal, or lie. In business, use honest scales and don't take bribes. Actively protect the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the stranger. And for community peace, simply don't hold grudges or spread malicious gossip. And this foundational command from Leviticus 19:18 anchors that entire ethical core. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. It totally proves how the Layman's Code was ultimately about human dignity, community support, and personal morality, rather than navigating endless state paperwork and bureaucratic loopholes. Now, along with treating others well, the individual just maintains some basic personal boundaries to treat themselves properly and remember their distinct identity. This meant a clean dietary framework, like avoiding scavengers, pork, and shellfish. And it meant keeping physical distinctiveness, men keeping their beard edges intact, wearing twisted fringes called tzitzit on four-cornered garments, just simple, clear, physical reminders of who they were. Finally, the law protected the common man's time. The rhythm of time enforced a mandatory, complete weekly rest for everyone on the seventh day, the Sabbath. Think about how completely revolutionary that was for the ancient world. The law protected your time, your children's time, and even the time of foreign servants and livestock. No creative labor, just complete rest. Let's wrap this up. Section 5, the paradigm shift and redefining complexity. When you bring this all together and juxtapose our modern North Carolina citizen directly against our ancient biblical layman, the shift is staggering. On one hand, you have the modern legal system, over 169 chapters of crushing state bureaucracy, hidden subchapters, and daily regulatory paperwork just to, drive a car or start a business. But on the other hand, you have the filtered biblical layman living a surprisingly simple, streamlined lifestyle code of basic ethics, clean eating, and a guaranteed weekly rest. That quote-unquote massive ancient burden turns out to be incredibly minimal.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. We love to look back at ancient civilizations and assume their religious and legal codes were just impossible weights to bear. But looking at the actual reality of the texts, we really have to ask ourselves, are our sophisticated modern systems actually liberating? Or have we just buried ourselves in way more complex, unreadable paperwork than the ancient world ever did? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this totally changed how you view historical law.